All right, welcome back to season 4, episode number 2. We have our guest on today is actually of the Packers podcast, or Lombardi Legends. We have the host, Dane and Wags. Thanks again for coming on, guys.
Thanks, man. Thanks for
Yeah,
having us.
absolutely, JJ. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks again for wanting to come on. I saw you guys on Instagram, said I had to go ahead and message you and see if you come on. You guys responded, and said yes. So again, thanks again. And before we start talking about the Packers and the NFC North and some of the stuff that happened this week and last week during the NFL season and preseason and stuff like that, if you want to talk more about your podcast, we know it's about the Packers, but a little more about how you started and stuff like that.
Dane, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, Wags. See, that's the good partnership is displayed instantly with we're a good team here. Wags and I are long time great friends. We grew up together, and we've always been big Packer fans, right? Going all the way back. And over the years, we kind of joked that we needed some Packer therapy. And about five or so years ago, we were like, hey, why don't we try a podcast? Let's just try it out. And he and I, sat up in his home, and we put a couple microphones in front of our face, and we were like, let's just see what it gives. And after about 2 minutes, we we're like, whoa, this is way easier than we thought it'd be. We could talk about the Packers all day. 5 years or so later, we've had a ton of episodes. We've been fortunate to have a ton of Packer players on, gained a lot of good relationships and wonderful fans and legends out there in Green Bay and across Wisconsin and the country, and even internationally. So it's been a fun ride. We love the Packers through and through. And it's an honor to be able to talk about them week in and week out during the regular season and off season, and get some stuff off our chest or celebrate when things are going good.
All right, again, thanks again. And I'm really excited to talk about the Packers. As you all know, right now, it's kind of a big step for Green Bay. Again, don't forget to check out their podcast, though. All the links will be down in the description below. But let's now start with the first thing, kind of the obvious thing with the Packers this year is, of course, Aaron Rodgers is no longer with the Packers. He is now with the Jets. Jordan Love is the guy. And realistically, what should we expect from Jordan Love? Because it seems like, I know the first year with Rodgers wasn't exactly the best. He had a pretty solid year, but it was a little rough at first. What should we expect from Jordan Love in his first season with the Packers?
Yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting insight right off the bat. And Jordan Love has been with Packers. It's sports season now, so he's not a rookie coming in. That said, hasn't had a lot of opportunity, obviously, with Aaron Rodgers in front of him. And so I would expect that we'll get a lot of inconsistency. We're going to see some high points, and we're going to see probably some low points from Jordan Love this season. But this Packer coaching staff, they know exactly what they have with Jordan Love. And I think they're really going to, I don't want to say really manage him, because then you all of a sudden hear a game manager, right, with the quarterback. But they've got two excellent running backs in Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon behind him. It starts there. They've got a really solid, probably a top 5 offensive line. Still figuring out who the starters are going to be up front, but Packers are in a unique situation where realistically they probably have 7 starters and they've got 5 guys. So you're going to have that sort of self out. So even though he's got a really young wide receiver core, a really young tight end room that he's going to be working with in terms of pass catchers, a lot of speed and talent there. And we know that Coach LaFleur, coming from the Shannon McVay kind of background, they really love to be able to get guys in space. So I think, with a young rookie in Musgrave at tight end that's really turning heads already in camp, can stretch the field over the middle. They've got a lot of speed vertically with Dobbs and with Christian Watson. And then they've got a young wide receiver that's coming in that I think even just regular NFL folks that follow the NFC North are going to get acquainted with really quickly in Jaden Reed. They've got some guys. It's going to be someone different, I think, every week with Jordan Love, but they might even have a good defense for once. So we'll see. It's 2 different things to me. It's Jordan Love individually as a player. You referenced Aaron Rodgers in his rookie season. Really, he was a top 5-10 quarterback in the league right off the bat in his first season as a starter. The team wasn't very good. We went 6-10 in his first year. So I don't know if Jordan Love's going to ascend to that level. I think that's probably a little bit unrealistic to expect something like that, but we don't need him to. If the rest of the pieces around him work together, Aaron Rodgers didn't have that good of a season last year. What we need from Jordan Love is to really focus on things that he can do well. And I think the coaching staff has been working on putting him into position to be as successful as possible in the circumstances that he's in. So will this Packer team contend or really make a run to the playoffs? That remains to be seen. I know that we're in a unique situation where a lot of folks think that we're kind of looking up the ladder at probably the Lions and the Vikings in division. But I'll tell you what, this is a team that's hungry and motivated, and I think they've got a lot to prove.
Yeah, and JJ, if you don't mind me kind of popping in on that too. I mean, think about Jordan. There's a few things. I mean, just so far, we're watching every rep, right? Every single snap that this guy's taking. And I've actually got the stat in front of you, in front of me. So he's had 125 reps so far, just in the joint practices the Packers have had. They had joint practice against the Bengals earlier this last week, and 2 joint practices against the Patriots. And he's 48 for 91, 532 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 82.3 rating. That's where he's at. Now, granted, we're talking about joint practices here, right? We're not talking about live reps, NFL. But I think that our expectations are fairly high for Jordan. I don't think that we're coming in here saying we expect him to be MVP Aaron Rodgers style Jordan Love, but I think that we expect him to be more calm and poised in the pocket going into his 4th year. And we've seen that time and time again. Every time we've watched him on the field this year, he just looks like the game's slowing down a little bit for him. I expect him to make good decisions more often than not. We've seen it. He's making some really good intermediate throws. He's not afraid to check the ball down, but he's also taking deep shots. So I expect him to, he's got a little bit, for Packer fans, he's got a little bit more Brett Favre in him maybe than Aaron Rodgers. He's not afraid to sling the ball. He's going to take that ball deep. He's going to be aggressive out there. But all in all, I think we're looking at a guy who's going to be able to run Coach Matt LaFleur's offense to a high degree. Maybe he's not, your top 10 quarterback this year, but I think that he could certainly be in the conversation for top 15. And I think he could throw for a fair amount of touchdowns with that big arm. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be some interceptions. There's going to be some growing pains, but I think that the talent truly, truly is there for him to excel and learn as the season progresses.
I think one other thing, just to add to that, is a young quarterback, and David Bakhtiari was kind of teasing, I think, Aaron Rodgers yesterday on social media and with some interviews post-practice, pointing out that they actually have a quarterback that can run with the football again. Aaron Rodgers, that was his bread and butter for years and years. And I think in the last couple of seasons, we saw he's not really obviously at the point of his career where we'd expect him to tuck and run with football. In fact, most Packer fans were saying, Aaron, just throw it away, live to see another down these last couple of seasons. But with Jordan Love, you've got a guy that not only the Packers dangerous running the ball with the running backs they have behind him, now all of a sudden you got a quarterback. Well, yeah, he may not be Josh Allen, Justin Fields, one of those types of quarterbacks that can really, really be elusive and run a lot with the football. I think he is someone that, he could pick up 20 yards in some games. And sometimes that's all you need is 2 or 3 carries for 20 yards from a quarterback. And they got to really respect what you're doing on the boundaries. And those can be really backbreaking 3rd down pickups when a quarterback can scramble and run, pick up a 1st down, move the sticks. So I think that's another element that this Packer offense, frankly, has been missing the last couple of years. That's just not an element of Aaron Rodgers' game anymore. Nothing against Rodgers, because that was something that for 15 years of his career, he was able to just really, really break defenses down, not only with his arm, but his ability to sneakily go out and pick up 10 yards here and there.
Yeah, and it seems like, for a long time, Rodgers was able to, scramble and do all that. And it was until either 17 or 18 when he got hurt. I think it was Anthony Barr hit him. It seemed like he kind of avoided running as much, and plus he got older. But also with Jordan Love too, it seems like with Jordan Love, he's improved a lot since his first start against the Chiefs, 2 years ago. He didn't look terrible, but he just didn't look that great. Now, we did throw a touchdown, but I think he's definitely improved, at least what I saw, at least against Cincinnati. I haven't seen a whole lot of the joint practices, but I did see him a little bit in preseason. Granted, it's preseason, but he looked all right. And I think, as you mentioned, he can scramble a little more. I think it was Steve Young mentioning, I think he went on the Dan Patrick show or something, that you almost have to be a mobile quarterback in today's day, because, that's what most quarterbacks are. And you got to take advantage of that. And it's nice that Love is, he's only 24. He's got a fresh legs for the most part. And, I think his offensive line is finally, as you mentioned, healthy. Now, I know they don't have the best receivers in the world. They have very young receivers in Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, but they have two very good running backs. Aaron Jones is probably top 10, maybe even top 5. You also have A.J. Dillon, who's a very good backup running back and a very complimentary piece to Aaron Jones. Where do you think their running game ranks in the league? Do you think they have a top 5, top 10? And do you think they'll be more of a balanced team instead of just being a heavy passing attack?
Yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen, right? I mean, every year is so different, but I'll tell you what, every year when you hear about the top running backs in the league, Aaron Jones, for some reason, gets left off that list. And we've watched every snap Aaron Jones' career in Green Bay, and he is electric. He plays 25 pounds bigger than he looks. He's good in goal line situations. He's got really good hands out of the backfield. He can do a little bit of everything. And you mentioned A.J. Dillon as well. I thought, A.J. Dillon last season, a little slightly down of a year, a couple more drops than he probably would have liked out of the backfield, but he's going into what we would consider a contract year. And, he's really, I think, finding his rhythm within this offense. So I'm not sure where they, across the league, where they're going to rate. I have said, and I sincerely mean it, that the Packers have a very deep running back group, not only those two, but some of the competition behind them. There's a lot of guys that I think have the ability to play some real snaps in the league, but I think that A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones really complement each other extremely well. And one of the things about Aaron Jones in particular, and I think something that a lot of Packer fans shout at the TV on the regular is, he needs to get his touches. The more often he's getting touches, it feels like the Packers are winning football games. So I think that Aaron Jones is likely going to be Jordan Love's best friend this year. He's a leader. He understands the game extremely well. He's a team player with a capital T, but he's also somebody that can still, rush for easily over 1,000 yards as long as he stays healthy, can catch the ball out of the backfield. He's going to be a great safety blanket, security blanket for Jordan Love. So I really like this running back group this year, and I really like the 1-2 punch, because you can get Aaron Jones, who's got all the speed in the world, but then you got A.J. Dillon with those big legs, and he's just a bulldozer with the ball, especially when it gets cold in Lambeau Field in the fourth quarter come November, December. Give that ball to A.J. Dillon when everybody else is tired, and look out.
Yeah, and I just add to that, I think, as Dane alluded to, jury's a little bit out, because we thought we should have ran the ball a lot more the last 2 seasons. And there was so many games Packers would come out, it seemed like their game plan, first series, they get Aaron Jones 3-4 touches, move the ball down the field. Maybe it's not a touchdown, but you get a field goal. And then all of a sudden he doesn't get a carry for the rest of the half. And it was befuddling how often that happened last year. Coach LaFleur gets up to the podium after the game and says, "That's on me." I love Coach LaFleur taking ownership and taking accountability, but he started to sound a little bit like a broken record when it came to the running game. Now, is that all his game plan? Was that some of Aaron Rodgers seeing some different looks, because they're going to have run pass calls at the line of scrimmage, certainly, and that's not going to change under Jordan Love. So you have to take what the defense is giving you. One thing I would also say is we, for whatever reason, and it may have been part more on the young receivers last year than it was on Aaron Rodgers, but just could not really get the vertical pass game going last year. And so that kind of stagnated the running game. I think particularly, Dane, as you mentioned, A.J. Dillon, that affected his yards per carry quite a bit. I think defenses were able to not necessarily come up and press the line of scrimmage and play a heavy box. You do that against Aaron Rodgers, but we did see a lot of high cover two. We saw a lot of cover three looks. And so that made things pretty difficult, I think, for that both the vertical pass game in terms of timing just wasn't on. And then that doesn't keep things from being able to open up underneath with the run game. A guy like Aaron Jones, he can go out and get 5.5 yards per carry, regardless of what the defense is doing in front of him. But yeah, I think it will be interesting to see if we're able to be in a non-predictable way, able to stick with a more balanced attack, as you said, JJ, because we can't put that much pressure on Jordan Love to have to be slinging the ball around in long down and distance situations. If you fall behind in games, really expecting Jordan Love, especially early in the season, we'll see what he has and how he progresses, to be having to bring you back from behind week over week. So I think it's really critical that the Packers establish some tempo, get some rhythm with the run game, and are not be afraid to punt the ball, quite honestly, and maybe win some games with special teams, trust in their defense, and then take some of those deep shots. Jordan Love's got the arm to do it. We've got the wide receivers vertically on the outside to do it. It's just a matter of timing that up. And then I think that opens up some things underneath for the run game as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned last year the Packers should have probably ran the ball a little more. They should have been more lenient on guys like Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. And I think there was the game against Buffalo. I think it was middle of the season. They were getting blown out in this first half or something like that. They started running it. It might have been or they started running and it actually worked. And I felt like it was just a little too late. Maybe Buffalo was playing the pass, or maybe Buffalo wasn't doing as much, but it seemed like the running game was actually working, but it was too little too late. So especially with you got basically a first-year quarterback in Jordan Love entering his fourth year. He doesn't have the best weapons, and if you have a good offensive line and a great 1-2 punch, I think you got to run the ball more. I know nowadays you have to be able to pass it, but if you can run, that really helps your offense, because then they respect the run. So then you can finally open up the passing game. Another question.
JJ, real quick on that. I think it's kind of an interesting trend we're seeing in the NFL, and I'll be brief on this, but Packers have a fullback in camp, a true fullback, and Henry Pearson, and they're not alone. There's about half the league right now. I've noticed, because I'm obsessed with the fullback position, has a fullback on their roster. Now, how many of those actually make the active 53? Not clear, but with this expanded practice squad, I'm expecting more fullbacks in the league right now or this year than in previous years, probably the last 5 to 10 years. And the reason I think that is so many of these teams are playing too high, daring teams to run the ball. And if you have a fullback that can come in there, and you're forcing these defenses then to kind of come up and bring another guy in the box. So it's just another fascinating dynamic. So you mentioned that, but it makes me think the Packers may have some more interest in running the ball with the fullback on their roster right now. We have another guy, Josiah DeGuara, listed as a tight end, but for all intents and purposes, he's 6'2", plays more like a fullback or an H-back. So I expect the Packers to be trending a little bit closer to, I think, what Matt LaFleur's ideal offense is, and that's going to be running the ball a little bit more with a fullback or an H-back or whatever you want to call it in the backfield.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like I said, with fullbacks, it is a little interesting because it seems like most teams, if they have a fullback, they use more of a tight end or just another running back. And it is interesting because I actually didn't know the Packers had a fullback in camp. I just thought they had all the running backs, and I thought they'd use more of A.J. Dillon as kind of their fullback. But that is an interesting point that you bring up. I do know that I'm going to mention him again. Aaron Rodgers is no longer here in Green Bay. And now that he's gone, who is the leader of this team? Because it seems like Jordan Love would be the obvious choice because he's a quarterback, but this is his first year starting and is entering his fourth year. Is he the leader of this team, or is a guy like Jair Alexander, who probably, in my opinion, is the best corner in football, at least he's the only one that can shut down Justin Jefferson, at least the last time they played, is a guy like David Bakhtiari, who's been there for a long time now. He's finally fully healthy, it seems. Maybe a guy like Christian Watson now entering his second year, maybe he finally steps up and becomes that leader. Who do you guys think really is the leader of this Packer squad?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I actually would say it's none of the guys you mentioned. On the defensive side of the ball, I honestly feel like it's Rasul Douglas, and he may not be the best individual player on the defensive side of the ball, but he's turned himself into a really quality player. But he's been the guy that's really been very vocal in camp, not only with the defensive side, but I think really just bringing a lot of tempo, bringing a lot of energy, and trash talking a lot of guys on his own offensive sideline as well, as the defense was winning a lot of the battles in practice early in camp. It's been Rasul Douglas that's been making the headlines and really, I think, trying to push guys on and recognizing that, yeah, he might get under their skin a little bit. They're on the same team, but they iron sharpens iron. And I think he's been the vocal guy that stepped up quietly on the offensive side. And maybe as a team as a whole, it's Aaron Jones to me. And he kind of just carries all the respect of everyone in the entire locker room. He's the one that went over and calmed Rasul Douglas down a couple of times when he started to maybe get a little bit too vocal. And there's a response to that. He's the one that went, and he didn't need to do this, but he went and worked out with Jordan Love during this offseason and made sure to wrangle some of the other guys. So he's been the consummate professional that I think has bridged some of the, even though this is a very young team, some of the veterans that are in the Packer locker room with some of the younger guys. And so I really feel like it's Aaron Jones's team. He's the quiet leader, and Rasul Douglas on the defensive side has been the captain that's been the more vocal leader. So those are the two guys that stand out to me at this point in time. Jair Alexander, you mentioned, great individual player. I think he guys feed off of his energy. Maybe not necessarily as much of that vocal leader. And then I think some of those other young guys are certainly have an opportunity to step up and take a larger leadership role as well.
And I'll throw in a couple more. Devondre Campbell, who he was captain last year, is somebody who had a really good year 2 years ago. Last year was dealt with injuries, battled through a lot of stuff. But a lot of guys look to him. Preston Smith, who does not get enough credit by, I think, Packer fans or anybody else. Wags and I beat the drum for Preston Smith because he's always where he's supposed to be. He's somebody that I know edge rushers in particular look up to. And finally, Rashawn Gary, coming back from an injury, battling back, coming back way sooner than anybody thought. He's one of the hardest working guys out there, any team, anywhere, brings energy, plays well. I think he's growing into his own. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a captain this year based on everything he does. He's always present. He's always around it. Even when he's hurt, he's not sulking. He's around the guys. He's keeping them active. So not as many offensive guys, right? It's a young offense, but I think defensively, and that I think lends itself to who this team is. For the first time in a long time, I think the Packers have a defense that's got a lot of dogs on them, and they want to go play some ball.
Oh, did you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I was just thinking on the offensive side, one other guy that I would mention that got in a little bit of a kerfuffle in the joint practice last week against the Bengals, Elton Jenkins. So you think about David Bakhtiari. David, he's everybody. He leads the way. And I'm not saying he's not a leader, but I think Elton Jenkins sets the tone and the attitude of the offensive line, and they've got a good one. And Elton Jenkins still a pretty young player, and I don't care, what anyone says, that guy is not an all-pro just because he was blocking for Aaron Rodgers. Just go ahead and look at all the stories coming out of Jets camp right now about how much they want more protection up front. These guys still have to go out and do their job, and Elton Jenkins is, I think, one of the best offensive linemen in the league, and he can play multiple positions, but he can settle in at left guard, and I think he's in for a big season as well.
Yeah, Elton Jenkins, for some reason, he just slipped my mind. I forgot about him. And yeah, I mentioned him. He's definitely one of the top tackles in football, one of the best offensive linemen, I should say. But yeah, you mentioned a lot of those players. It's definitely going to be a new look for the Packers. And I feel like they're going to have to rely more on their defense than offense, unlike the previous years. But I think their defense, I don't know, it feels like they have a top 5, probably a top 10 defense just because they have such a good secondary. Again, you have Jair Alexander, you have a good pass rush, and we got guys like Preston Smith. I mean, I do think this is a new look Packers squad, but I feel like they're going to be relied more on defense for the first time in quite some time. So, All right, so now that we kind of mentioned David Bakhtiari already, there was some kind of news this week, or him and Aaron Rodgers kind of were talking over social media, and there was a few Instagram stories and I think even posts that Rodgers tagged Bakhtiari in, and the Jets could definitely need some offensive line help. There's been rumors swirling that Bakhtiari could possibly go to the Jets, even though Schefter denied that and said that was false. There was actually no rumors about that, and I think the Packers probably would not trade him, but what do you guys think about that whole situation? And do you think it's more of Rodgers playing fun with Bakhtiari? Or is he just trying to openly recruit him?
Wags?
Well, first of all, Rogers is a world-class troll, and I mean that in the nicest way. Because, I mean, I think both he and David know exactly what they're doing. They're just messing around with people right now. The reality is that David Bakhtiari, for the Packers to trade him, and I'm not just talking about the Jets, it's any team. They would carry, I believe, over a $19 million cap hit for both this season and next season. So right off the bat, they owe David Bakhtiari $23 million this season. They trade him. They're basically just carrying an entire dead cap hit. So would you want to keep David Bakhtiari for essentially, if you think about it, an extra $3-4 million? I think most teams would probably sign up for that, even with his injury history and the fact that he's past his age 30 season. So just from a financial standpoint, it really makes almost no sense for the Packers to trade David. And then talking about traded David to the Jets, Packers really want to get as high of a draft pick as possible. So if you're a Packer fan or any part of the Packer organization, you're cheering for two things: for Aaron Rodgers to play a minimum of 65.1% of the snaps for the Jets this season, because 65% or higher, trade escalator kicks in. Packers are eligible for the Jets' first round pick. And for the Jets, frankly, not to do so well with Aaron Rodgers under center this season. So trading David to the Jets is actually counterproductive for the second piece of that. Maybe not so much for the first piece. You could argue that, well, if you want Aaron Rodgers to stay upright and not get hurt, maybe they should help them upgrade their offensive line. But I don't think the Packers are feeling particularly generous when it comes to the New York Jets. They've got a young quarterback that we just talked about earlier in Jordan Love. And boy, would they love to be able to give him plenty of time and protection as he learns and works through his progressions in his first season as a starter. So just from both a financial and practical standpoint, I don't see the Packers trading David Bakhtiari, period, but especially to the New York Jets. So I tend to think it's just David Bakhtiari, Aaron Rodgers, good pals, having some fun, trolling everyone in the media and all the fans out there, particularly the Jets fans that are really getting excited about the possibility of Aaron, the GM of the New York Jets, bringing his old buddy back in.
Did you want to mention that, or did you want to talk a little bit about that, or did you have anything to say? Or
I agree. I mean, David's not going to the Jets. Do I think there's a possibility, some remote possibility, that Bakhtiari's traded either now or at the deadline? Sure. Packers have done some interesting stuff in the past. There's a guy named Josh Sitton who's actually getting put into the Packer Hall of Fame this year, who was, entrenched as a starting guard for the Packers. And right before training camp wrapped up and regular season started, the Packers cut him. And so they've done things. Now, that was a number of years ago, completely different circumstance. The cap hit was nowhere near what this cap hit is. So he's not going to the Jets. Bach's not going to the Jets. I think that the Packers would love, as Wag said, to see the Jets, have Aaron under center for those 65% and lose a ton of football games and get that high first round pick. But does Bakhtiari end up in another uniform at some point in the next couple of years? Potentially, but I don't think it's going to be in New York unless he's, cut, the ties are cut and he ends up as a free agent. But I don't see the Packers doing that anytime soon either.
Yeah, I'd agree. He may get traded, but I think it's a much, much higher possibility it's at the end of the season. And then we'll look at what the financial ramifications are at that point. But I just don't see it as a very realistic possibility anytime this season.
Yeah, and one last thing. I mean, Wags mentioned earlier that the Packers have potentially up to 7 offensive linemen that could be starters in this league. And, one of them, there's a battle right now at right tackle between Zach Tom and Yash Nyman. excuse me, I think both those guys could play. I think Yash could be starting left tackle in the league. I think Zach Tom could be the future starting right tackle for the Packers. So, they do have that depth, but we also know this is a league and a position that's riddled by injuries. And I'm not really looking to, trade from a place of strength and become weak all of a sudden because one or two injuries to the offensive line, which by the way, happens all the time in this league, could go from Jordan Love being upright, throwing balls and getting more comfortable at the NFL level to, running for his life, so to speak. And I don't think we're looking for that this season.
Yeah. And I've forgotten too with you kind of mentioned that the Packers traded Rodgers to the Jets this year and they play at least I think it's either a 65 or 75% chance if he plays they get the Jets first round pick.
Yep, 65, yeah.
Yeah, and it was kind of that trade between Rodgers and the Jets was basically a standoff pretty much the whole offseason. I don't know if they want to go through that again with another Packers player. So I don't know, that's another thing that doesn't really make any sense. And I didn't think he was going to be a trade, but I just thought it was interesting because the Jets desperately, and not necessarily desperately, but they need an offensive line. And it seems like that might be the weak part of a Jets team, especially Rodgers is going to be 40, in November, December. So that doesn't exactly sound great. But then you also mentioned that the Packers have a lot of depth at offensive line. Not many teams in the NFL right now have a lot of depth at offensive line. So that I think it helps the Packers out with and you have a younger quarterback too. So I think that's kind of a situation where you just don't think that's going to end up happening. It's just kind of a thought maybe, but
and JJ, one last thing that I don't think enough Jets fans maybe are thinking about, but we're very, very keen on is the fact that if the Jets do look to, find another offensive lineman or another position via a trade, good luck trading that first or second round pick because they'd have to come back to the Packers to negotiate that out of that contract. Because right now, both of those are tied up until they determine, how many snaps Aaron Rodgers plays. So potentially there's more back and forth between the Packers and the Jets, but the Packers not only, are held the chips, I think this whole offseason, but they still hold the chips for the Jets first and second round picks should they want to upgrade significantly on that offensive line this season.
Yeah, I would just really love to have another round of Twitter wars between Packer fans and Jets fans about which front office holds leverage in the trade negotiations. That was just such enthralling and exciting time in our offseason. So could we revisit that, please, and have David Bakhtiari on the trade table between the Jets and the Packers?
That would be definitely fun to watch again. Yeah. But anyways, let's get on to another topic. Now, this might not be exactly a super popular or super, this might not be the most, this might be kind of a dumb question, I think. But if the Packers don't make the playoffs this year, and that would be 2 straight years of not making the postseason, could Matt LaFleur be on the hot seat, even though we had 3 really good years where they won the division and had at least 12 or 13 wins? Do you think he could be on the hot seat if they don't make it to the playoffs this year?
Dan, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, it depends. You ask some Packer fans, he's already on their hot seat. There's no doubt about it. So here's the deal. Mark Murphy, the Packers president, is the president through, I believe, 2025, at which point he's going to be retiring. I'd be absolutely shocked if Mark Murphy is making another head coaching hire before he retires. That's my impression. Wags might disagree, but I think that Matt LaFleur right now, this is going to be a really unique and interesting year for Coach LaFleur. This potentially is where we get to see who Matt LaFleur really is as a head coach and as an offensive mind in this league. For the last number of years, the first few years, and I feel for him, he came into a tough situation as a head coach with Aaron Rodgers. He's gone through, I think, the first year that they went to the NFC Championship game. Packer fans that was a surprise. I don't think any Packer fans have thought that, that was going to happen. I think they really overachieved, the first year with Matt LaFleur, but then with all of the offseason issues with Aaron, Matt kind of had to play, peacemaker, I think, a lot. So he was concentrating on a lot of things, not just football. He's playing a lot of politics, unfortunately, for him as well. This year, going into it, we are going to see a Matt LaFleur offense. We are going to see how he operates with a team where there isn't a guy who's roughly the same age, who's won a ring and a bunch of MVPs, also trying to call the shots. There's no power struggle I think, going into this year. And I don't know how much there was before, but now it's absolute. This is Matt LaFleur's team. He's the head coach. So I think what we're looking for is it's not do they make the playoffs or not, although I think the expectation is Green Bay is we want to make the playoffs. We expect to make the playoffs, but it's how does this team look when they get punched in the mouth? Do they come back from those? Because we've seen this team fold when they get punched in the mouth sometimes. What does this team look like going forward? Is this a growing year? Do they look like they're building towards something? If they're not building towards something, or it looks like they're starting to flatten out, or this team's plateauing, or Matt LaFleur is not making an impact the way you want him to make an impact, they get sloppy, then potentially we could see something change. Not after this year, I don't think, but he could be in the hot seat going into 2024.
Yeah, this is clearly a Coach LaFleur season. A lot rides on how the team performs. It's not just what their record is, but I think the circumstances that might dictate whether he is truly on the hot seat or not. And certainly a lot is going to be progression of the team, as Dane mentioned. This is a young team. They might struggle a little bit early, but they start playing better and better over the course of the season. That's coaching, right? And so I think that's going to be a key component of how Coach LaFleur and the rest of his staff, for that matter, are truly evaluated by this Packer front office. But listen, make no bones about it. He doesn't have an MVP, first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback to fall back on anymore. As Dane said, this team, unfortunately, has gotten a little bit of a reputation for being a bit soft. I think with not only our own fans, but around the league, with coaches calling out and recognizing. I think Sala last year, I'm paraphrasing, said, yeah, we could take them out to deep water and they wouldn't be able to swim. I know Dan Campbell really felt like he could out tough this Packers teams, and we saw that happen in a couple of those games against those opponents. So this is going to have to be a different brand of Packer football. I don't expect them to be out there and being the most physical team in the league necessarily under Coach LaFleur, but he's going to have to build an identity that's different than what they've had in years past. He's going to have to show that he can coach up a young first-year starting quarterback in Jordan Love. And I definitely think he's going to have to prove that he doesn't hang on to guys and coaches too long and really drives accountability, both on his staff and in the locker room. Because that's been another criticism, I think, particularly of some small minority of vocal Packer fans, and maybe for some good reason, that he's been such a player's coach, in particular, that he's had guys back perhaps a little bit too long, and that can hurt some of the accountability and the sense of urgency in the locker room. So it'll be interesting to see what lessons he's learned in his first few seasons as a coach, and very highly successful seasons, I might add, not last year notwithstanding, and how that helps him build an identity around this young team moving forward.
Yeah, and I think also, too, with LaFleur, I think this is kind of his first year that he can prove that he can be a good coach and not just be, because I think that first year we kind of thought, oh, it was mostly because of Aaron Rodgers, especially when he had won the MVP in 2021. I think it's a chance that LaFleur can actually prove that he can be the coach and he can be the guy. And especially with a young quarterback first year starting, I think he can prove that he's a legitimate coach and that he can actually lead this team instead of it being carried by Rodgers, is what I think a lot of people thought. So we'll see there. I just kind of thought it was interesting because no one has really brought it up. And I'm just wondering, especially if you miss the playoffs in back-to-back years in the NFL, you all of a sudden are in the hot seat, and no matter how successful you were your first few years. So it's just kind of a thought with LaFleur. So,
and I think some of the criticism is merited in some ways. Coach is going to have to make some adjustments. We lost a lot of close games in the second half last year. We went into the locker room leading at halftime, and so that's something that you really look at, is how you can game plan the first three quarters, but you got to play a 4-quarter game, and so at a certain point, game flow and you start to figure your opponent out, and tone and tempo can start to take over, particularly in the trenches. So what adjustments Coach LaFleur and the rest of his staff make can make a big difference at the end of some of those close games. And I think for a reason, he's had some misses. He's had some wins too, obviously, but I think he'll be under a little bit more of a microscope this season, no matter whether he's on the hot seat at the end of the season or not.
Yeah, it does seem like he could be on the hot seat, but I just don't think, especially you mentioned, Dane, that, or Mark Murphy's the president until 2025. He doesn't seem like he wants to make a coaching change before he leaves. That would just be more work for him. So I don't feel like they would do that, but it is intriguing to see what will happen. Now, let's go on to a different topic. I kind of want to mention a little bit about Hard Knocks, and I don't know if you guys really watch much of it, but we'll wait for that for a little bit later. Now, a former guy that used to somewhat torture the Packers, just signed with a new team. He signed with the Jets, Dalvin Cook. I was shocked that he was released by the Vikings. I understand a lot of teams don't want to pay a running back anymore, but he's still a premier running back. And were you guys really shocked by the news that he was released and then the Jets were able to pick him up?
I wasn't as surprised about him getting released, I suppose. There was a little bit of rumblings. We've got some friends that are Vikings fans that, seem to have their finger on the pulse, and we're always kind of, hiding in the weeds, listening to the Vikings chatter. So I don't know how unexpected it was, I think, for some of the Vikings fans out there, but he's a great player. Dalvin Cook's been a great player. He's a game changer. He's a guy who, against the Packers, we've seen it before where, the Packers are up by a considerable margin and you're feeling pretty good. And all of a sudden they hand the ball to Dalvin Cook on, the Vikings own 20 and he's gone. And all of a sudden it shifts momentum, it shifts the game. So he has that ability. He still has that ability. We've watched him twice a year for however many years he's been in Minnesota. So that's what I know about Dalvin Cook. And he's always made a good, a great impact. And anytime I hate a guy on the Vikings, it means he must be pretty good. And man, I really don't mind not having to face Dalvin Cook this year.
Yeah, and I think it was a bit surprising, but yeah, Cook I think is still a good running back. And I remember all those days he'd be shut out, and then by the third or fourth quarter he'd be running all over the field, and we're like, where'd this come from? So that's why I thought it was just really shocking to see get released. And even with Cousins and with how good Justin Jefferson was, it felt like Cook was still a huge part of that offense. But it's a little shocking to see. So is there anything else you guys wanted to mention about Dalvin Cook before we go into another topic?
Not really. I mean, I think, like Dane said, he's been a really productive player. The Packers, he's been kind of hit or miss against the Packers, actually. He's had some huge games against the Packers, and the last few seasons, they've actually held him under check pretty well. For a young player, I do wonder when a guy gets released like that from the team that drafted him. I think it'd be fair, especially with the running back, to question whether he's on the back end of his prime. I know he's still pretty young yet, but you have to wonder what his health situation is, because I do know that he's been a little bit dinged up the last couple of seasons and hasn't been quite as productive as I think with the Vikings. Obviously, we're hoping when they invested in him, they gave him a pretty sizable contract, I believe 2 off seasons ago. So not terribly shocked. The Vikings, not a well-run franchise. I don't know if you're aware of that, JJ, but we're not fans of the Vikings. So anytime chance we can get to point out that they just can't really get things right and keep things put together to put that old championship run together. I can't say I'm shocked that the Vikings came up a little bit short.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens this year. I think that's actually a good segue to my next topic that I want to talk about, and that's about the NFC North in general. The Packers dominated the NFC North for such a long time, ever since they won the Super Bowl in 2010 or 2010/2011. It's pretty much been their division. The Vikings have kind of had a little bit. The Bears have had a little run, maybe a little here. And it seems like now the Lions are what everybody thinks are going to be the next team in that division. I still think the Vikings are better, just a little bit. I still think the Bears are probably number 4, but where do you guys give a ranking, like power ranking 4 through 1? What's kind of your ranking in the NFC North right now?
That's a great question. I mean, trying not to be completely biased. I think I would put the Lions number one just for this season. Vikings, it's interesting. The way that they went about building that team, they kind of stripped some things down a little bit from a team that went 11-0 and one score games during the regular season. And we know that's not going to happen again. I don't see the Vikings being a better regular season team where they start dominating teams and have less of those one score games. So it's easy to sit back and say, well, if the Vikings just end up going, 500 or so in those one score games, which is typically what you see in the NFL for most teams, then their record's not going to look nearly as good. It's a new season, so we don't know how it's going to play out. It's going to be a little bit different from a narrative perspective, but yeah, I think the interesting thing, JJ, when you look at the NFC North is defensively, Packers have underperformed I think, particularly the last couple of seasons. And so I don't see a lot of defensive juggernauts in this division. I think the Lions have a solid defense that's been improving under Dan Campbell. Definitely, I think the Lions have the best offensive team in the division. And so you got to like what you see from them. Frankly, I thought they were better than the Vikings last year and would have performed better had they made the playoffs than the Vikings did. Certainly, the Vikings kind of laid an egg at home against the Giants. But the Bears, we've seen this so many times over the years. Danny and I have been hardcore Packer fans for a long, long time. And sometimes the Bears, I don't think they're the best team in the division. I'm not going to sit here and say that. I agree that they're probably number 4 on paper. But I can just remember so many seasons where we thought the Bears were going to be terrible. And then all of a sudden they start off, 7-2, and they build a defense, they build special teams, and you're sitting there scratching your head wondering how the Bears are on top of the NFC North. And you get to the end of the season and they've won the division title. So it seems like the Bears, I'm most wary of them when they're kind of, laying in the weeds a little bit, and they're clearly a better team and a better roster this year than they were a year ago. They've got another year of familiarity with the coaching staff. So similar to Detroit last year, that made a jump second year under Dan Campbell. I think the Bears will be a little bit more competitive. So I don't see a clear-cut favorite in this division. I'd say Detroit has a slight edge. I think the Packers are right there. I actually have them ahead of the Vikings, to be honest with you, JJ. And I think the Bears are going to be competitive as well. I don't think there's a team that I wouldn't be surprised if this comes down to the wire and all of these teams are between 7 and 10 wins at the end of the season.
Yeah, and I don't disagree, Wags. If you want to bet safe, you go with the teams that have quarterbacks that are more established, right? So you got Jared Goff in Detroit, you've got Kirk Cousins in Minnesota. Both of those guys have won football games in this league, and we kind of know what we have in both of those guys. We saw Fields last year extremely electric, but if he with his legs, if he can complete passes downfield, look out. As Wag said, the Bears could just jump out and be really, really good football team this year because it's such a quarterback-driven league. But there's a question mark there, right? Can Justin Fields do that? And then the Packers also have the question mark in Jordan Love, and we're about to find out what Jordan's able to do in this league. So if you're a more modest bettor, so to speak, you place your bet on Detroit maybe or Minnesota based on the quarterback alone. But if you think Justin can throw the ball, then maybe the Bears. But I'm putting my chips with the Packers. I'm saying that, and I sincerely mean that. I think Jordan Love is going to be able to play probably as well. I really believe this, by the way. He's going to be able to play as well as Aaron Rodgers did last year, because I thought Aaron Rodgers had a down year last year. And I think he could actually be slightly better in this offense than Aaron Rodgers was last year. I'm not saying in totality of his career, but last season alone. And if that's the case, and this Packers defense continues to grow the way they did near the end of the year when they kind of, caught fire and caught up, and the special teams continues to trend upwards. I know there's some ifs there, but I really believe that this Packers team could scare a lot of teams, scare a lot of people, surprise a lot of those national pundits that are writing them off right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, and those quarterbacks with more familiarity. The Bears seem like they are getting better, but it seems like it's still going to be a year or two. Minnesota seems like they might take a little bit of a back seat, and it seems like kind of the wild card here is Green Bay and probably Detroit. Now, Detroit is likely, a lot of people think they're going to win this division. I still think Minnesota's going to win it, but I do think that this division, now that Rodgers is gone, it's kind of the tide has turned to where it's kind of an open division, similar to when Brady left New England. It kind of became, well, it kind of went to Buffalo, but it kind of seemed like it became open for a little bit there. So we'll see what happens. It's exciting.
Yeah.
Oh, what was that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, that's an interesting comparison. I was thinking a lot of the AFC North, actually, for a few seasons, how jumbled that was. And when Roethlisberger started getting towards the end of his career, there wasn't, you had some really talented teams. It was kind of the black and blue division of the AFC. And I know that the NFC North is kind of the black and blue division of the NFC of lore. So we could see a return to that this year. And you mentioned, Dane, some of the proven quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff have had some success in this league, but I don't think they're scaring anyone across the NFL. Certainly not guys that you expect to lift a team and carry them through a regular season in an MVP fashion. So I think this will be very, very competitive division, and it's going to go back and forth over the course of the season.
Yeah, it will be fun to watch. That's for sure. We are kind of running out of time here. We have a few more questions I kind of want to ask, and I don't know if you guys have been really paying attention. I'm just watching the clips right now. But what have you thought about Hard Knocks?
Wags has been the Hard Knocks consultant on our podcast.
It's for Packer fans, it's like a train wreck. You can't look away. It's interesting. We love, Aaron Rodgers, despite, anything. It's been kind of strange the last couple of seasons. But he's honestly, I think, and not to speak for you, Dane, but I've heard you say it before. He's I think both Dan and I's favorite Packer player ever to watch play. We've been Packer fans long enough that we saw the majority of the Brett Favre era in Green Bay as well. So there's a lot of guys that you can pull out and mention in the time that we've been watching the Packers. But to get to Hard Knocks, Aaron certainly has a nice edit, I think is a nice way to put it when you're watching this. What's interesting is what's going to happen when the chips are down, because I've noticed, and JJ, I'm curious what your perspective on this is, but it did seem a little bit like Aaron walks on water. When you watch that. And I'm not talking just about Jets fans. I'm not even just talking about some of his young teammates. I'm talking about the coaching staff and the front office when Aaron Rodgers walks in there. And that has a lot of downside potential in my mind, because then you lose a couple of games and maybe Aaron's not performing quite as well as he would like to, and things just aren't clicking right. That's where things can unravel in a hurry. I noticed one scene in particular. Sauce Gardner was sitting there chatting up Aaron, and it was just a very, very awkward conversation. You've got a 39-year-old quarterback talking to, I think Sauce is probably like 23, 24. They just clearly have absolutely nothing in common. And Sauce is talking about how he's watched Aaron play since he was 7 years old. So it's an interesting dynamic. I'm sure there's probably awkward conversations with teammates when Aaron was on the Packers as well. But nonetheless, I think it's still fun to watch. And I know Hard Knocks gets a little bit of a bad rap over the last few seasons, but I'm enjoying it, even as kind of the spurned Packer fan watching Aaron Rodgers on the Jets. It's kind of an interesting thing to see him have his fingerprints all over the program. And I think clearly he's in league with some of the producers of Hard Knocks to make sure that everything looks really fine and dandy as far as how Aaron Rodgers is being portrayed on the program.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why the Jets are so enthralled with, Hard Knocks. And I think we also think of Rodgers a little bit different, because for a long time, I still think a lot of people in the NFC North, if you're not a Packers fan, you don't like Rodgers. But I felt like somehow in Hard Knocks, it's made Rodgers more likable somehow. I don't know. It just seems like people are liking Rodgers more. Maybe it's because they're seeing more of him. And He seems to just be kind of a different person. I also think the Jets are just happy to actually have a capable quarterback, and no disrespect. Well, I don't want to say anything bad about Zach Wilson, but let's be honest, he was not good last year at all. And I feel like now that Rodgers is there, he can kind of be the guy that for the next few years, he can be the Jets quarterback, and then he can give Wilson some pointers. So when Wilson is ready to take the job again, if he does, he's had Rodgers for those years. And I feel like that's why Jets fans are just so excited to actually have someone in it and stuff like that. So also real quick too, before we end the interview, I got like 3 minutes here. But the kicking situation has not been great this preseason. Crosby's no longer there. Real quick, do you think the Packers will stick with what they have now, or do you think they'll go out and just add a kicker?
Potentially add a kicker. Right now, they've got 2 long snappers, 2 punters in camp. They only have the 1 kicker, and it's Anders Carlson, and he's had some difficulties hitting field goals and extra points. So I think we got our next preseason game on Saturday. We're going to see what's good there. But even this week in joint practices, he's had some struggles again. Wags and I touched on this the last couple of podcasts of ours, and I think that initially I thought, hey, bring in another young leg to compete, at least have some competition with Anders. If he continues to struggle the way he's struggling, I know Mason Crosby, the Packers' longtime, future Green Bay Packer Hall of Fame kicker, is still out there and looking for a job. I wouldn't be completely shocked if Mason Crosby gets signed and the Packers try to stick with Anders on the practice squad. We have a history of keeping kickers on the practice squad and trying to develop him throughout the season, and have Mason, who's tried and true and has done it for years and years in Green Bay, as the primary kicker, because this is a team that can't leave points on the field this year, and the Packers need to recognize that at some point, and I'm just hopeful it's sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Continue there. That's my bad.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, the one thing that's a sticking point is our special teams coordinator, Rich Bisaccia, has a relationship actually with Dan Carlson, who's Andrews' older brother, was cut by the Vikings his rookie season, and some of the struggles he had there. So maybe the Vikings gave up on older brother of Anders Carlson, Dan, a little bit too soon, and now he's one of the better kickers in the league with the Raiders. So there's some interesting relationships there that I think will be part of the dynamic. But this is a big boy league, and kickers got to go out there and perform. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Yeah, you realize how important the kicking position is when you get to that point, and you realize how many points or how important the kicker is, especially when you get 3 points here and 3 points that can come a long way. So again, thanks again for coming on, guys. Again, we have a few minutes here before we have to end. But if there's anything else you want to mention, feel free.
No, just thank you so much, JJ. Appreciate it. Anybody's Packer fans or just want a Packer fan perspective, visit Lombardis Legends podcast. You can find us on all of your social media, and we've got great interviews with players. We give analysis. We do a couple pods every week during the regular season. We're all year round podcast for Green Bay Packers, and that's what we talk about is the Packers.
Yep, and do a game preview every Thursday during the regular season. So if we're your upcoming opponent, you're a fan of the team the Packers are playing, I think just give us a listen, give us a shout out, join us and share your perspective on that upcoming game. Dane and I are homers, but I think we're pretty even keeled when it comes to really analyzing those game previews and giving a good solid perspective on both the opponent and what we expect the Packers to do for that week.
All right. Thanks again for coming on. Don't forget to check out the Lombardis Legend podcast. Your host, Dane and Wag. Again, thanks for coming on. And again, enjoy the rest of the season. And, if the Packers get far, we're going to have you get on the pod, and we'll see you then.
Thanks, JJ. Love to come back.
Yep. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Sportstown podcast, or the STP pod for short. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and much more. Also, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Sportstown Podcast. If you want to check out more videos of the Sportstown Podcast, click on the right.